All right, let's go live now to one of our first interviews here, Chris Chmielenski of the Immigration Accountability Project. Chris, I know you were on last week. We did not see what was happening in Los Angeles at that point. Now we do. What say you?
Yeah, well, first of all, our thoughts and prayers are going out to the families and the ICE agents themselves and their families that are unfortunately being, in some cases, under violent attack by some of these protesters, and hope that they stay safe as they're really doing the right thing for our country and trying to protect the nation and protect public safety by going after some horrible people that are in the country illegally. And that's truly who they're targeting out in LA. But this is something that we've seen before, these types of protests. We saw it in 2005, 2006 with the May Day protests in the lead up to the 2007, 2008 amnesty bill. We saw it again. We saw it again around the 2013 Gang of Eight bill. We saw it again in the first Trump administration back in 2016, 2017, 2018, back in Portland. So this is nothing new. What we have seen come back are the Mexican flags. That word got out that it wasn't good television optics to be flying international flags at some of these protests and marches. Fly American flags if you want to be recognized here and stay here in the United States. But apparently that memo didn't go out this time, as we're seeing all sorts of Mexican flags and other flags being flown by the marchers and protesters.
So did you, over the past 72 hours, have you been, monitoring social media or just watching news? And just what are your thoughts right now that the fact that they're saying there may be more of these type of protests, so-called protests, more of a riot, day 4 in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see them. And you have sitting U.S. senators that are calling for violent protests across the country. And interestingly, we've got a couple of votes coming up in Congress this week. For example, the House of Representatives is going to vote on legislation on whether or not non-citizens can vote in D.C. elections, after the D.C. City Council said that they could. So they certainly have the authority as the U.S. Congress over the District of Columbia to overturn that local law. So now we're hearing calls for violent protests in D.C. We're calling it for in other places, especially where there's notices of these ICE actions going on. So I think you might see it pop up in places across the country. It's interesting. You could see after the first couple of weeks or even first couple of months, especially with the turnaround that Gavin Newsom did on issues like men playing in female sports, the whole transgender sports issue. He was starting to moderate some of his positions, but not on this. For whatever reason, this is the one that triggers them. It never goes well for the other side. The optics aren't well for them. We're already seeing some tweets from Elon Musk. This might be the thing that brings Elon Musk and President Trump back together, because after all, this was one of Elon Musk's top concerns early on. So I think the protests that you're seeing in LA aren't going to be the last that you see in LA, and I don't think they're going to be the only ones that you see in the country. I think they're going to start popping up in other places. But I think that's also why you saw the Trump White House react so quickly by activating the California National Guard and talking about also bringing in the Marines.
I think that people that are maybe on the left side of the aisle or maybe indifferent, they're just living their lives out there, may be shocked. Oh my gosh, you called the National Guard, but we have a president that actually does what he says. And I think that's part of the shock for people is we just haven't had this kind of real action for the reformation of this country. It really takes these kind of things to happen, does it not?
Right, it does. And, I'd like to, well, first, for starters, that's part of the reason why they're protesting. They're trying to stop the aggressive immigration enforcement that the Trump administration is currently doing. So that's what somewhat triggered these protests. Not that they're acceptable, and even you've heard it from the White House. Even Tom Homan said this morning, listen, I respect First Amendment rights. You can go out there. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to assemble. You can protest all you want, but when it turns to violence, that's where we draw the line. And that's what the White House is currently doing with the calling up of the National Guard. But I think what they're trying to also do is send a clear message across the country. hey, listen, if we have these sorts of violent protests in other cities besides just LA, this is how we're going to respond.
Exactly. And the key word there is violent protest. If it's just a protest and it actually is peaceful, obviously that's protected in the Constitution. But you cross that line, then of course we see what's been going on out there in Los Angeles. Your thoughts about specifically the big, beautiful bill when it comes to all of the immigration security? I mean, part of the money will go toward finishing the wall and also increasing salaries or bonuses and more people to really take care of business. Your thoughts about that specific part of it?
Right. And that's the strongest part of the bill. I mean, absolutely putting some money towards more border barriers is helpful. But what we really need is we need more boots on the ground. It Border Patrol is pretty well established. I think they're funded right now for about 25,000 agents, but this will increase Border Patrol funding as well to get more boots on the ground. But ICE is what really needs additional officers on the ground. The only thing that I do caution is it's going to take some time for us to see the results of this. It does take time for the federal government to hire new law enforcement officers. There's background checks, there's physical fitness tests, there's all sorts of things that go into it. So it's going to take some time to amp up, but it's absolutely a step in the right direction. And I think we'll see it as long as we can get what's in the House bill in terms of outside of the other issues that are in there. But when it comes to immigration enforcement issue, as long as we can keep immigration enforcement, as long as that can stay together as it works its way through the Senate and probably again back through the House and eventually to President Trump's desk, that will really help us amp up or help the federal government amp up these interior enforcement efforts and also increase the number of deportations that we're presently seeing.
Exactly. And then also outside of that in the economy, we'll take those tax cuts, 13 to 15% for people that make 30,000 up to 80,000 a year. But yeah, so we're going to see exactly to your point, how it goes with the U.S. Senate. And we're hearing from people like Carolyn Levitt and others on X and on Truth Social saying this is now, look at this. Here's proof in the pudding or case in point of why it needs to be passed. Chris, any other information you'd like to share with us? Anything else you guys are working on there at the Immigration Accountability Project?
Well, obviously following everything that's happened in Colorado and what's going on in Los Angeles, these couple of bills that are coming up in the House, but truly focused on that budget reconciliation effort that you brought up. The good news is so far we haven't really heard the Senate complain too much about the money that the House set aside for immigration enforcement. All we've really heard on the negative is a few senators saying we need more money for immigration enforcement. So we would be open to that as well.
Do you think that people that are maybe, 20 years old, 22, 23, 27, and they say, hey, you know what? I might not have joined the military, but I'm going to go join Customs and Border Protection and to patrol the southern border. I mean, it looks like that's going to be, the recruiting is going to be a little bit easier possibly there.
You might. And after you saw the response through just the election results of people's reaction to what happened over the 4 years under the Biden administration, with just essentially just throwing open the southern border and the impact that it has on the United States. And there are a lot of people that, of course, came across the border and aren't going to do harm here in the United States, but a lot of bad folks came across. And we've seen that come to fruition in the last couple of weeks alone. So I think you could see. I think the reputation for immigration enforcement is not quite as bad as it once was. And certainly when you throw open the border of the country and you pretty much put immigration enforcement on hold, you're going to have you're going to see that sort of a response saying, hey, this actually does play a role in keeping the nation safe and ensuring public safety.
And it just goes to show it's not just our country. There's so many countries out there dealing with border security. I was actually looking yesterday at some news in the UK and the Reform UK Party with Nigel Farage talking about mass migration there and showing a bunch of illegal immigrants, not from, Central America, South America, people from all around the world. The same thing we're dealing with here. So this is a global thing going on, isn't it?
It really is. And I mean, the migration issue was one of the things that helped lead to Brexit. Because the second you stepped foot inside the European Union, you could go to any one of those countries. So the second you could get into Turkey, for example, you could then hop on a plane, go to Germany, go to England, some of the more wealthier countries within the European Union. So it certainly is an international issue. And I think a lot of countries around the world, not just the United States, are starting to realize the impacts of unchecked mass migration into their countries, and the impacts that it has on the welfare system, public infrastructure, all sorts of different issues.
Do you think there needs to be a detox process for the people that are the woke mind virus types around this country, of the fact that so many times we've been so tolerant with everything in this country and politically correct so much, and the law and order has been so weak over the years, but now we're seeing, oh, these guys are committing crimes, we have to deport now. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, we've been so soft in some of these areas over the years.
Right, right. And I do see that. And I think that's the way that the Trump administration is looking at this, or trying to position this, the case of the Maryland man, Kilbaro Abrego Garcia, where, okay, here's somebody that we deported. Everybody got all upset that we deported him without due process, under their arguments. But now we're bringing him back, and we're going to show you exactly how bad this guy is. And they have all of the list of indictments that came from the grand jury, with all of the instances of human smuggling that took place in Tennessee that he's now being accused with. So they're going to show you exactly why they're getting rid of these people. And that could be sort of the breakdown of the woke barrier on this issue of illegal immigration, especially when it comes to deportations. Because deportations for most, not most, I won't say most, but for close to half of the country, deportation still seems to be a dirty word.
That, I hear you. And so, to your point, President Trump saying that on Air Force One, that basically going to show the country, like, this is what this guy has done specifically. And people like Terry Moran at ABC News and other people that are out there on the left side of the aisle, always coming to the defense of people that are criminal, illegal aliens. Does that make any sense to you at all?
It doesn't. And what it does is it just shows their true colors. They just don't want anybody deported. That's their bottom line. Whether they're here, whether they're a criminal or whether they're a non-criminal, they just don't draw the line. They just don't want people removed from the country. So, like I said, I think this particular case may end up exposing. Obviously, it's going to go before a jury of his peers, and they'll have the final say on it. But if the White House, if the administration gets a conviction on this, if the federal government gets a conviction on this, I think it'll show a lot as to, and might end up changing some minds, changing a significant number of minds. Of course, you may end up having to dig for those news stories, because I'm sure while the news networks were great about talking about his deportation, his removal to the El Salvadorian prison, they're not going to talk about this if he's found guilty of all these human trafficking charges before a jury of his peers.
Wasn't there video from police camera video, showing him in there with the human trafficking situation? I mean, there's actual proof that's out there, let alone the MS-13 thing on the knuckles. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, they have that instance of the body cam footage of where he was pulled over, and they actually reached out to the Biden administration, and the Biden administration said, no, let him go. I think they said there were 9 individuals that were in the car without identification, or all had the same identification, but they all gave the same address. But apparently now it sounds like there's even more of those instances that they have now turned over, that they've gotten from Tennessee and maybe from some other places.
And that is something that's unfortunately happening in pockets around this country, the human trafficking situation, even outside of fentanyl and just criminal, illegal crime. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us from the Immigration Accountability Project. Thank you again. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me back on.
Definitely.